Welcome to First Mile's Climate Heroes. I'm your host, Bruce Bratley, founder of recycling company First Mile. On this show, we meet and learn from the climate heroes who are building solutions right now to tackle climate change. Today's guest on First Mile's Climate Heroes is Nigel Harvey, CEO of Recolight, the lighting and electronics recycling company. Nigel's also been a previous guest talking about his activism with Extinction Rebellion, and thank you for coming on the show again. Today, Nigel is here to explain the importance of electronics recycling with a particular focus on lighting. It's estimated there are over 600 million light bulbs in use in the UK today, and Recolight is achieving recycling rates of over 50% for lighting. So Nigel, welcome to Climate Heroes. We seem to be very good at lighting up the planet. You can see our light from space and it consumes a huge amount of materials and energy. But what's the environmental problem with lighting and how are Recolight solving it?
I mean, you're absolutely right. There is lighting everywhere, and it's almost a function of humanity is that one of the first things we do is start lighting up the space around us. The reality is actually with lighting in some ways, it's like every other product. We have to be much more abstemious in what we use and when we use it. And the best form of lighting is actually that nuclear reactor in the sky. And so the best approaches to designing lighting now is to try to maximize the amount of daylight that's used so that you're not lighting places unnecessarily, and having systems that switch off lighting when you're not there, when there's nobody in the building, are a really important part of trying to make lighting even more efficient.
I love fellow leaders in the recycling sector when the first thing they say is not to produce waste in the first place and switch things off. It's counterintuitive, but it's definitely the right way to go.
Absolutely. I mean, we'd be very happy if we massively reduced the amount of product we recycle, but saw that reduction because there was more being reused or less being consumed. That is a much better environmental outcome. So many of us look at recycling and think, oh, recycling, great, job done, ticked box, we're achieving something. The reality is that it's way down the waste hierarchy. We should be reducing what we use and reusing what we can't use anymore, much more than recycling.
I've wrote lots of questions in preparation for the podcast, and the one that was the most stupid question I'm going to ask, but I'll do it early in the podcast, is what's the worst type of lighting for the planet?
Ooh, well, almost certainly it's those incandescent light bulbs that we all used to have in our houses, 15 years ago, and you once a week the job will be to walk around the house and take out all the old light bulbs and the ones that are gone and replace them with new ones. Those were incredibly energy inefficient, and so modern LEDs are around 90% more efficient than those incandescent ones, but they are dire. And when I cleared out my father's garage a few years ago, to my horror, I found a stockpile of incandescents. So I had great joy in making sure that they were never put into service.
Brilliant. And I guess the sort of the second worst type of lighting is one that's not switched off, probably, which I keep telling my children that that's the case.
Absolutely. Again, walking out of a room, the logic for us all, particularly at the moment with the energy prices being what they are, the logic is absolutely to switch off everything, and that goes to the lighting as well. And I think one of the concerns is because a lot of us have got LED lighting, and because it consumes a lot less energy, people are happy to leave them on. We should still be switching off, even though they are much more efficient, because they're still consuming a bit of electricity.
And I mean, lighting is much more conspicuous than waste heat, for example, unless it's a cold day and we can see it escaping from stacks. But as a proportion, are we wasting a massive amount of energy through lighting, or is it relatively small? I mean, any energy we can save is important, but is it relatively small in comparison to not having our homes and offices insulated?
It really depends on what type of lighting technology we've got in place. Most businesses will have switched, I think, away from incandescent and halogen lights to more environmentally friendly, either fluorescent or even better still, LEDs. But there is still more to be done in that area because there are still quite a large number of fluorescent products in service currently. And in fact, there is going to be quite a change because during the course of 2023, a significant number of fluorescent lamps are going to be effectively banned from sale. In the UK, we are effectively mirroring some bans that are being brought into place in Europe. And so that will provide further momentum to businesses to move away from fluorescent and into LED, which is materially more efficient.
And are they being banned because they're less efficient or because they're sort of harder to recycle at the end of their lives?
Primarily it's mercury. They're mercury-containing lamps, and mercury is hazardous to health, and is one of the main reasons why we do what we do when it comes to recycling lamps. And so handling that mercury carefully and responsibly is at the heart of that driver. Clearly also, they are not as efficient as LEDs, so there's you have the twin elements.
And so LED is currently the best technology for lighting that we've invented. Is that the case?
That's correct, yes. And it's still getting a little more efficient, but the jumps aren't nearly as big as the jump when we move from fluorescent to LED.
And is the LED recycling problematic when it gets to the end of its life, or is it a relatively benign product that can be recycled more easily?
It's an interesting point. They are harder to recycle than fluorescent tubes. One of the benefits of fluorescent tubes is that they were all very similar in construction, very similar in composition, and recycling works best when you have a fairly uniform feedstock. And so the more heterogeneous the feedstock, the harder it is to get a good recovery rate of materials. So whereas fluorescent tubes are actually quite straightforward to recycle, LEDs, you've got a plethora of different construction materials and methods. You've got glass, plastic, ceramic, or metals of various types. So you get a lot more heterogeneity, and with that, they actually are surprisingly, therefore, harder to recycle than fluorescent.
And they do feel like a much more sort of solid product rather than a tube or a bulb, which is sort of quite a fragile thing. They feel almost like a sort of much sort of high degree of engineering in them.
That's very true. And actually, one of the challenges with fluorescent products is that they're almost all got fragile glass components, and so that creates an added level of hazard when collecting and recycling them. Less so with LEDs. They're solid state, basically.
What's your sort of projection when everyone will be moved over to LEDs, or do you think it's sort of just taking such a long time that it's sort of impossible to tell?
Well, it's one thing for most products sold being LEDs, but actually getting them put into service takes a lot longer. And so in terms of the waste coming back, we still think it'll be more than 50% fluorescent by 2030. In other words, there will be a long, slow tail of product returning. That's partly also because LEDs last longer. So once you put an LED in, it doesn't take as long, or it takes far longer before it comes back as waste.
Sometimes it feels like we've got too much light in the West, and particularly when you see those images of the Earth at night, and all the main sort of light pollution sources are big cities of Western countries. Two questions: have we got too much light in the West, and also are developing countries now sort of in some ways getting ahead of us because the only thing they're installing is LEDs, or have we made the mistake of exporting old technology to developing countries and they're having to put in inefficient lighting?
I know one of the benefits of LEDs is they're more directional. And so one of the issues when you see images of the planet from outer space, you see lots of light. That's in part because street lighting or some street lighting can release light upwards as well as downwards. LEDs can be more directional, so they can place light where you need it on the road or on the pavement. But even so, many more councils now are switching off street lighting between, for example, the hours of midnight and 5 o'clock, or midnight and 6 o'clock. That's energy saving, but actually it's also reducing light pollution. As regards the sort of the global south, I'm not sure exactly what the level of take-up of LEDs is, but you're right. In some areas, it may well be possible that just as they leapfrogged wired phones and went straight to mobile, it's quite possible that if you start for the first time, you'd obviously go straight to LED and not implement anything that was suboptimal.
And I think when Recolight started, it was very much a compliance scheme, and we should probably explain what those are to listeners around producer responsibility, where lighting producers need to take responsibility for their lighting at the end of its life. But we've spoken on a couple of occasions now, and it feels like that you're moving the business more into the area of thinking about these wider environmental issues associated with lighting, and it's almost sort of more consultancy, if you like, around solutions on lighting and making, getting businesses to focus on reducing the amount of energy they're using or installing the right things. And is there a change that's happened over the last couple of years in the business in terms of from a sort of straightforward plain vanilla compliance scheme into having wider impact?
Yes, I mean, when we were set up, we were set up as a not-for-profit organisation owned by four of the world's largest lighting companies, and we're still that. We're still not for profit and owned by producers. So our mission is not to make money for shareholders. Our mission is to do the right thing for the now north of 200 companies that are members of our scheme. But yes, over the last 2 or 3 years, we really have transformed the way we run our business, and it started really, in truth, because of lockdown. We had planned to run a small conference about lighting and the circular economy in March 2020, and of course March 2020 didn't happen for most of us, and so what we did instead was to move to online webinars. And we've run, I think now since then, over 20 webinars with over 3,000 people listening again. And we have used those webinars, used our commitment to the environment to really drive and change our business and to focus far more on helping lighting companies to adopt circular economy principles far more. And so we also ran a conference and exhibition called Circular Lighting Live a couple of months ago, which was ran at capacity with 250 delegates. We're doing the same next year and we've increased the capacity by about a third. We're providing other services and support to help lighting companies design products for the circular economy. And it's partly that the circular economy is really important. It's partly the passion of the Recolight team and myself for trying to make a difference in our business. And it's also partly that there is a latent need that companies out there need this extra support and help, because they all recognise that the circular economy is something we have to be moving to, and we're helping them to achieve that. So that involves things like third-party certification to specific circular economy standards, information services. So really, from the grain of one conference that was due to start in lockdown and never happened, actually we're doing so much more now.
And what are the key? I mean, that's fantastic. And what are the key principles then for? Because I'm very sort of familiar with the circular economy of packaging, if you like, and materials that come from sort of regular recycling, if you like. But what are the principles of circular economy in lighting?
Well, perhaps one of the most fundamental ones is modularity. And so, because there are lighting products now that you and I could buy or businesses could buy, and actually they're a concealed unit. And if one part fails, you effectively have to take out the whole thing. It goes to waste or recycling, and you have to buy a new one. So having a more modular approach to that product, so you can remove and replace critical components, is the key. And then there are issues like what do you use in terms of the raw materials? For example, do you always use virgin plastic, or can you use some plastic from recycled sources? Because ultimately there's no point in you and I running companies that recycle plastics if they're not being put back into new products being made? What's the point? So encouraging manufacturers to use non-virgin plastics is something that I think is going to really become increasingly important. And I suspect we're going to see standards and legislation around this area before too long.
And is it a very long supply chain in terms of where lighting is made across the planet, or do we have a domestic lighting industry here?
Actually, as an electronics industry, lighting is unusual in that we do have a significant number of UK-based manufacturers. If you go to other tech sectors like refrigeration or display equipment, televisions, there's virtually no manufacturer in the UK. With lighting, there are quite a number of manufacturers. So yes, actually talking to them in terms of circularity means we are talking to the right people who can make a difference. And of course, another part of circularity is shortening supply chains as well. And so, a shortened supply chain is always going to be better than bringing equivalent product from the other side of the planet.
And is there an element of, the modularity sounds ideal. Is there an element also of putting more resources and technology into the lighting system so it becomes smarter, it switches on and off, it learns, a bit like your thermostat at home learns when you're going to come home, it turns the heating up, turns it down again. Have we sort of got as developed as we're going to be with, a sensor that switches the light on when you go in the loo and then switches it off again, or is there more coming around the technology?
There's a huge amount of that technology available. A lot of it has not yet been implemented. So yes, that occupancy detection that detects the presence of an individual and then switches on the lights is available, is not used as widely as it should. There are some systems that will light up a corridor as you walk along it, but then the lights behind you are being switched off and the lights in front of you are being switched on. So you almost walk through a cone of light, and it minimizes the amount of time that the lights are actually switched on. So there's a lot of smart controls available. They haven't been as widely used as they should.
And what do you think the barrier to that is? Just a sort of higher cost of installation, or? It's
cost, it's awareness, it's knowledge. It's perhaps partly because people think, oh, we've got LED lights, we've done the lighting, let's move on. And it's the danger of the ticked box. I think a ticked box is a real danger. We should always be looking at every box and saying, is there more we can do in that? Because actually, to really address the climate crisis, to really address the energy crisis, we cannot afford to leave any stone unturned.
First Mile is the UK's leading waste management service. We help over 30,000 businesses reduce their carbon impact with our award-winning range of recycling solutions. Go to our website, which is thefirstmile.co.uk, to get started today. If you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to subscribe. We have brand new episodes every Wednesday.
And just going back to circular economy then, are you looking in the sort of work you're doing with the lighting manufacturers, are you looking at new ownership models? So rather than manufacturers selling lighting to a building, it's lighting as a service where it's rented rather than actually selling the product?
Yes, I mean, and a number of our members, as I mentioned, we've got about 200 lighting producers that are members of our scheme, and some of those are offering lighting as a service. And clearly there's a lot of benefit to that, because effectively it means that the original producer still owns the product, and when it reaches its end of its life or end of the contract, it's on a long contractual string that effectively the producer can pull, and the almost always the best organization who could then take in that used product and upgrade it, update it, reuse it is going to be the original producer. So there are distinct benefits associated with leasing models. Then I wouldn't say they're in wide use at the moment, but certainly some are implementing them.
And that sounds like, I was going to ask about the level of reuse and upgrading of light fittings, and it sounds like that's something in its early stages at the moment, but definitely something that's possible.
It is, and we are trying really quite hard to drive up reuse, and it's not easy, Bruce. Perhaps the most successful models are when a company owns a building and says, right, I want to improve the lighting, but I'm willing to get the ones that are already in situ upgraded. Then they will bring in a contractor who will look at it and say, yes, well, we can do X and Y, we can take out this fluorescent component and put in this LED light source instead. If they get taken out and then given to us as waste fittings, it's a lot harder to get those reused, partly because the contractor just drags them out the ceiling, drops them to the floor, kicks them around a bit. They're then regarded as waste rather than a used product that's capable of a further life. And so dealing with them in that situation is hard. We're still trying, and we're looking for opportunities to encourage reuse, particularly if products have got higher intrinsic value. And I'm sure we will have some good examples of success, but they will be few and far between compared to that alternative approach, which is where the original owner says, I'm not going to chuck these out, I want to do something with them.
And is the it's an important distinction between the fittings and the actual light source, the light bulb. Is the producer responsibility on the fitting as well, or are your members only responsible for their? Is it still called the bulb if it's an LED fitting? I don't know.
We tend to call them lamps or light sources, but our members make both, and we're responsible for both. So both the fitting and the separate light source, if it exists as a separate light source. And as I mentioned before, you do get some light fittings that are completely integral with no removable light source.
We've talked about minimising the use of light, minimising the use of fittings, reuse, different business models, but fundamentally, you're hitting this 50% recycling target that we talked about in the introduction. How are bulbs recycled? Is it a very specialist stream, and what are the challenges around recycling light sources, I should say?
Yes, I mean, for fluorescent tubes, there are half a dozen companies around the UK that are specialist recyclers, and you've got to break the bulb in controlled conditions, or the fluorescent tube in controlled conditions under negative air pressure, so that the mercury vapor is collected appropriately through carbon filters. Then it goes through a process of separating out the metals from the glass and other materials. So yes, it is quite specialist, and we work with a number of those independent recycling companies. We're a scheme, so we actually manage the collection ourselves and then deliver the product to our recyclers.
And what's the problem with people just dumping lights and light fittings in general waste bins?
It's a real problem, and particularly with businesses, because actually they may end up taking out a number of fluorescent tubes, and it's so easy, unfortunately, for those to be put at the bottom of a skip, and then you throw a load of bricks on top, and they've gone, they've disappeared. The only problem is the mercury hasn't, and so you've then got mercury contaminated waste. That mercury can contaminate landfill, can contaminate rainwater, surface water. It is far better for them to be properly recycled. And the truth is, actually, we offer a free recycling service because we're financed by our members, because we're a not-for-profit. Provided any company collects sufficient waste lamps, we will give them a container for free. We'll then collect it for free, and we'll even pay for the consignment note as well. And we will deal with the waste, get it delivered to one of the recyclers, and can make sure that they've been properly recycled.
And if you're a member of the public and you've got a sort of a box in the garage full of bulbs and tubes and lighting, how do they find you to recycle?
Probably the best approach there is to take them to the nearest household waste recycling centre, and there will be a container on that site. Some of them will be ours, some will be other companies, and they can be left there and they will be properly recycled. No doubt they'll be properly recycled by an authorised organisation based in the UK.
And are you getting either a separate part of the business or parts of light fittings, other electronic equipment, or batteries? Do you get backup batteries in certain commercial light fittings, or are you finding that your waste stream is getting broader and broader and broader that you're trying to handle?
Yes, we certainly collect waste batteries as well, because actually, yes, light fittings that are emergency light fittings contain backup batteries. And so when our members are involved in projects to, for example, take out a whole load of light fittings and replace them with new LED versions, we can provide a battery container into which the waste batteries can be placed, and we'll make sure those are recycled as well. So yes, we recycle an increasing range of different types of products, with the objective of making sure they're dealt with properly and kept out of landfill.
You're collecting a good proportion of the UK's waste lighting through Recolight, Nigel. What's coming up in the future that you're excited about? What are the new initiatives that we're going to see from Recolight?
I think some of the biggest changes are actually changes we need in the legislation. And it is shocking that online marketplaces continue not to, or to be largely non-compliant with the WEEE and other producer responsibility legislation. So, for example, I just went through an exercise of looking at disposable vapes on Amazon last week. I looked at the first top 50 when I searched on disposable vapes. I got something like 600 hits. Of those first top 50, not a single company selling those products was registered for the WEEE regulations. Complete non-compliance. As we probably know, you probably know, disposable vapes are a real problem, and you get exactly that, or a very similar situation mirrored in lighting as well. A large proportion of the LED light bulbs that you and I could buy on most online marketplaces are not compliant with the WEEE regulations. This is an issue that's been around for 5, 6, 7 years, and we still unfortunately have got a situation where the government hasn't implemented the changes that they could to bring these companies into compliance.
And is that because they're registered abroad, or because they are registered here and unaware, or aware and avoiding registering with a compliance scheme?
It's both. And so of those 50 vape companies I looked at last week, I think roughly half were based in China, roughly half were based in the UK. And you can understand why the Chinese ones are harder to bring into compliance, but the half based in the UK, the Environment Agency, as the WEEE police, should effectively be knocking on their doors and getting them into compliance, and it's not happening.
And what would success look like for you at Recolight, Nigel?
Success for me would be a significant increase in the level of reuse of light fittings that we are able to encourage. And that would be because an increasing number of our members, particularly those that manufacture in the UK, have set up reuse and remanufacturing facilities so that they can take their own product back, upgrade it, and place it back on the market. It's about moving from energy efficiency, which is, we've largely achieved in the lighting sector, to material efficiency. And material efficiency means we can produce another light source using far less materials because we're reusing so many of the parts. And so I would love to be able to further help our producer members to achieve significant higher levels of reuse, and that for me would be a real plus. Sorting out the online marketplaces absolutely as well. That's a DEFRA change in legislation. I'd also like to see DEFRA change the legislation that and they're actually considering this, to give businesses the right of free uplift from their sites, subject to there being sufficient sort of waste for collection. But yes, I think there's still work to be done before we hit success, and I'm looking forward to doing it.
And do it on the reuse. Do you think the legislation needs to change for that, or is that hearts and minds primarily?
I think it's mainly hearts and minds and the market. I think there are some areas in which the legislation has to be changed to make it easier for businesses and consumers to do the right thing. And so one of the examples always mooted is actually don't charge VAT on reused, remanufactured product, and that would be an easy win. But then at the same time, I understand that in the current environment, Are the Treasury going to be looking at trying to exempt more products from VAT? Absolutely not. So, but we do need some step changes like that make reused product more attractive to businesses and to consumers.
Excellent. And then Nigel, we're sort of drawing to the close here. We've got a few more things going on. And what other climate initiatives are you getting excited about? Or there might be others that I'm not aware of yet.
Gosh, climate initiatives. Well, personally, as you mentioned, I'm very active in Extinction Rebellion, and I remain convinced that non-violent direct action is the best way of raising the profile of the need to act on the climate and of encouraging the government to change, because at the moment there is so much that they're doing that is not right. So absolutely, Extinction Rebellion, and there's a large protest being scheduled now for the 21st of April. So that to me is absolutely vital if we're going to remain with a livable planet, because we've really struggled to implement some of the good intentions that have been talked about in the past.
And indeed, and we don't really want the lights to go out on the planet, although the planet's going to be fine. It's just the lights to go out on humanity is the problem.
Absolutely. And that scares me. That really scares me, and I think it should scare us all.
Absolutely. We have a little feature called First Miles Climate Heroes Hall of Fame, where we ask guests to put a person, a thing, a thought in our Hall of Fame. What or who would you put in there?
I will put in the humble LED bulb, or lamp as we call it in the lighting industry, because actually, compared to incandescent products a decade ago, they have reduced energy consumption by 90%, and that is quite an awesome achievement. And so, we've all got them in our houses and we take them for granted, but actually that is a massive change.
And Edison and the other colleagues that invented the light bulb with him, what would he think of the LED?
I think Edison or Swan would be delighted by the technological achievement. I mean, it is so much more sophisticated than a simple, a little coil of wire that heats up in an atmosphere that allows it to glow without burning. It's a totally different way of producing light.
Thank you. That's a great addition. We also, what we're trying to do is to give people ideas of how to change their habits. So climate positive habit changing. If you were going to give people a suggested new habit to help the planet, what would it be?
I have to say that all of those good habits that we put in, like insulating our houses, getting rid of our gas boilers and putting in heat pumps, reducing the amount of meat and dairy we eat because it's bad for it produces a lot of methane, stopping flying, stopping driving, all of those are great habits, but I remain convinced that the biggest change we need to make collectively is for the government to put in those big picture changes. And so the habit I would encourage everybody to do is to actually get out there and protest, because until we get the government making it harder to do the wrong thing and easier to do the right thing by legislative and tax changes, our individual micro changes won't amount to a hill of beans.
Excellent. I love it. Get out there and exercise your power as a citizen. Well, Nigel, it's been fantastic having you on First Miles Climate Heroes. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It's always a huge pleasure to speak to you, and I now feel much more knowledgeable about the world of lighting. Thank you very much, and we will see you very soon.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it, Bruce. All the best.
I'm Bruce Bratley, and you've been listening to First Miles Climate Heroes, where we meet incredible people making an impact to tackle climate change. If you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review and subscribe to the show. We have brand new episodes every Wednesday.